Okay, now we're on Facebook.
Yeah, it's saying setting up. I think it's loading.
Yeah, we're live. I just got the ding on my phone.
Okay, go for it. I'll work on getting rid of myself.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight on our discussion. I'm so excited to have someone who has become an inspirational for me since I moved to Dallas. When I first initially moved to Dallas, I started in a program called Leadership ISD, led by the United Way, and Sean Lassiter was amazing. She came in and she taught us about our implicit biases. And when I say she brought a room of people to tears, she did. And so I'm hoping that you all really listen intently to the message that she's about to bring. Put your questions in the comments, and Laura will send them to me, and I'll ask Sean for them. But Sean's going to give a brief introduction of herself, and she's going to go into her presentation. And thank you again, Sean, for doing this. And let's begin.
Well, thank you so much, Leadership ISD Fellow. I just want to say hi to everybody. This is a different type of platform for me. I'm getting used to the new virtual world, but I get a lot of energy by being in the room with people because I'm so connected to people and humanity. And so this is different, but I hope you can feel me through the screen. So when I heard about your group and the work that you've been doing to come together and really talk about really difficult issues, super excited because this isn't happening everywhere. You know, a group of people who have committed to fight against racism and then being moms, that's close to my heart because I'm a mom. I'm a mom of 3 and 2 dogs, so it's like 5. So it's real near and dear to my heart. And so I just want to talk to you a little bit about maybe some things you can do as you go on your journey to becoming anti-racist and an anti-racist group of moms, tearing down systems of oppression. I thought maybe I could offer you just some perspective and some things to think about as you go on your journey, and maybe even some tools that you can use as you go out in the world. So I'm going to share my screen and kind of just begin. So one of my things that I do and I believe in is I talk a lot about building a braver space for anti-racism. And that is my Twitter handle. So you can definitely follow me there, and I upload and retweet a lot of information. But my goal, in this work is really to help build an anti-racist society. And so I just always start off with my name. My name is Sean Lassiter. But, my name wasn't always Sean Lassiter, right? I, always let people know that my real name is Roshonda. And although I love both my names, growing up, I didn't know that Roshonda was my name. Sean is the name that I knew that I was called at home. And so it wasn't until my first day of kindergarten when I went to class and I won the longest name contest because they put the name tags on the desk, and I found out my name was Roshonda. So I asked my mom about it, like, why didn't you tell me, is my name really Roshonda? And she said, yes, but we called you Sean. She's a long story, but my aunt, one of my cousins, 2 of my cousins wanted me to be named after them. And my mom only wanted to really name me after her favorite. I'm sure she'll know now who's the favorite. And so they disguised the name Sean in Roshonda. My other cousin's name was Kalboki. So it could be Kalboki standing in front of you today, but my mom went with Sean. So that's just the name. And I've kept it over the years, mainly because in job applications, people thought I was a man. And so I would get a lot of interviews and a lot of hits. And then when I show up, people are really, really confused that I wasn't a man. So I think it's funny. And so Sean Lassiter is my name. So, but my mission in life and my goal in this work is to increase racial consciousness in order to build a culture of anti-racism. And oftentimes people say, Sean, what is this thing? What is this racial consciousness that you're talking about? And racial consciousness is basically, your awareness of how race is impacting your life and impacting others around you and impacting the world that we live in. But it's really to build a culture of anti-racism. And this is the one I want to talk a lot about today because of your group and what you're doing. And so people say, well, what is anti-racism exactly? So I use something that we probably can all relate to. I don't know, several years ago, I forget how old I am now, but several years ago, it was this big initiative in schools where they were teaching children how to not just be, you couldn't just be a non-bully, you had to be like an anti-bully. You remember that, where they had all of the videos and all the posters that said, if you see something, you have to say something. So they were really trying to crack down on bullying. And so they really needed kids to understand that just because you weren't bullying didn't mean that you didn't have a place in stopping bullying. So they put out this anti-bullying campaign. And so when I think about being anti-racist, I go back to this moment of where adults employed on children, right, to kind of snitch out the bully, you know, and in a lot of cultures, snitches get stitches. So snitching is just not something we do, right? And so, but adults really, really held kids accountable to that. And so I think it's so interesting when I go into rooms to try to teach about being anti-racist and I say, listen, we can no longer be non-racist. Hasn't really worked for us. You know, if you see something, you have to say something. And how many adults really push back on that? But they were all for kids like being anti-bullies and snitching out the bully. So I'm saying I'm that teacher and I'm employing this on you. If you want to fight racism, we can no longer just be non-racist. We have to be anti-racist. We got to get in the fight, right? We got to actively work against all systems, all ideology that upholds the status quo of racism. And so I talk a lot about how do we shift then? How do we shift from a safe space to a brave space? Oftentimes we have these conversations, we really want to be safe. And what a safe space does is that it promotes shared dialogue, but really minimizes conflict, right? Because if anybody isn't safe, then we can kind of shut down the conversation. So safe spaces, they don't really work when you're talking about racism, right? We have to create brave spaces where people can counter narratives or where we can speak our truth and we can challenge others' mental models. And in this brave space, right, it's going to be uncomfortable and it's going to be tough. But in order to really tackle the systems around race, we have to step into brave spaces. And this is the difficult part when I'm facilitating a room, is I tell everyone, you know, we all come to this conversation about race with a different muscle, right? I've been a Black girl since I can remember. And so race around my household was something we talked about a lot. So my muscle around race is pretty big. But there are some people who are just really coming into understanding that they are a racial being. And so their muscle around race is pretty fragile. And so how do I, in that moment, create the right conditions in the room that we can all come work out, right? That I don't give too much to the fragile that I break them, but that I don't give too little to the strong that I insult them. So that's one of the things that I do in this work, is to really cultivate what I call a braver space, a space that we are going to come together. We're going to come from different perspectives and we're going to keep race on the table. And we are going to talk about it. And we are going to really look at issues specifically around race. All the other isms that we talk about that are much easier to talk about than race. So if you just think about it, it's easy to talk about sexism, right? It's easy to talk about other isms, but race is the one that's really difficult. And so, and this is the one that we haven't, you know, traditionally been socially constructed to talk about, right? Since when you were little and you were in the store, and you may have said, or you may have said this to your children. They say, oh, mom, look at that Black lady, or look at that white lady. The first thing we do is, shh, don't say that, right? So at a young age, you learn that identifying race is not the best thing to do, or you don't know why, but you just know that that's not something you say in polite company. So because of that, we have not really developed the skills of really just naming race and talking about it. So even as adults, we really have a fragile muscle around this as a community. And so creating a braver space is what I do. And so when we think about education, which I know this group is highly committed to, we ask the questions like, what is equity anyway? Like, what is this thing of equity? And you may have seen this before, where they talk about resources and things for children, right? If we just focus on equality, right, and we give every kid the same resources, it doesn't mean it's gonna meet every kid's need, right? So you see the kid who can't even see over the fence, one who can barely see, and then the one who has no trouble. But if we think about equity, that means that we give students, we give school systems, we give schools the right resources for their need in order for them to enjoy society and what we need in order to be a productive nation. And so this is that type of model that really just shows you the difference between, we can't really just talk about equality, we really have to talk about equity, because we have been a part of a system that has not allowed everyone, right, to start the race at the same time. And so, but when we think about racial equity, because that's different. So equity can kind of apply to like gender, right? So if you want equity in gender, girls aren't getting STEM. And so we want to correct some of the programs to fit girls specifically, or our SPED students, you know, giving them the proper resources. But racial equity is taking all of those subcategories and then disaggregating those subcategories by race. So if we say our SPED students aren't getting the right resources, and then we disaggregate that by race, what we find is that the darkest students are doing the worst, right? If we say that students of language are not getting the right resources, if we take all the students who are bilingual in our schools and we disaggregate it by race, then the darkest students are getting the least amount of resources. If we look at the discipline issue, right, and we take all the students who are being suspended, what we see is that if we disaggregate it by race, the darkest students are being disproportionately suspended and punished. So it's taking all of those issues that we talk about equity and then disaggregating it by race, and what you'll see overwhelmingly, no matter where you are all in the nation, is that the students of the darkest skin are usually doing the worst. So this is more of like what I consider racial equity. Like, right, the reality is that some kids start the race or start watching the game from a hole, right? So everybody's not on the same even land. And then some students get so many resources, they don't even really need them, right? And so then how do we begin to look at justice in a way that acknowledges the current reality that some students walk into kindergarten with too many boxes to carry, while others walk into kindergarten, right, beneath the ground on what they need to be to be prepared. Mm. And so that's just another image when I think of racial equity. And so this is my favorite tool, and I know a lot of people who know what I do, they love this tool.
Yes.
This is the compass. This is one of the tools that I introduce first. This is a navigation tool to help us to engage in conversations that could be pretty difficult, like race. Now, this compass was, it's originally from Courageous Conversations About Race, but their compass just looks like 4 quadrants and it has the words in it. But because I'm a visual learner and I know some other people are too, I kind of subbed in the words for pictures. And so this compass is something you can use for yourself. Again, this compass is not for you to use against people. This is for you to help navigate yourself through really difficult conversations. So I always ask people, like, you know, how many of you been in a conversation about race where it's gone really bad, really fast, right? And it's because oftentimes we all are in kind of different camps of the quadrant and we're missing each other, right? And so the compass is divided into 4 quadrants. And research says that basically that when you are emotionally triggered, or just triggered by something, you're oftentimes triggered into one of these 4 broad categories. So when you heard about all of the race, or when George Floyd died, let's use that for an example, when he was killed, and we watched that as a society, you know, where were you triggered? Were you triggered into your beliefs? Did you say, I can't believe this is happening, you know, in 2020? Or, yep, that fits right with what I believe, my morals growing up, like I saw people, you know, go through those type of things. So your belief set is that the cops need to be arrested, they need to be punished. So the believing quadrant is your moral like quadrant. The thing about the believing quadrant, though, is that we have been raised to believe that our beliefs are set. So that's why I put an infinity sign there, because really our beliefs should be evolving. The more we know, the more resources we have, the more relationships we build, we should be checking what we feel like we believe or what we've been taught, right? And so the believing quadrant should not be stagnant. It should be one that's always evolving, but our beliefs are pretty stubborn. But oftentimes when you have a moment or you see something or you need to talk about race, some people are triggered into the believing quadrant, while others are triggered into the thinking quadrant. Maybe when you saw the video and you saw the protests and everything that was happening, you started to ask questions, right? That's your intellectual quadrant. You may have asked questions, you may have started to read books, you may have wanted to watch, you know, videos or documentaries to educate you more. Some people are just traditionally triggered into the thinking about, you know, what is this about? And wanting to see data to solidify what they saw. Others were triggered into the acting. That's your social quadrant. Maybe you went straight out to protest. Maybe you joined a group. Maybe you started a group. You did something social based on what you saw, right? And then some of us were triggered into the feelings. And the feelings quadrant is all the emojis, right? So from the happy to sad, all of those go in the feeling quadrant. And so the goal when you're in a really difficult conversation and you're at that dinner table and someone says something that triggers you and you have a gut like response to it, you first have to figure out, where did you go on the compass? So oftentimes when hard situations come up for me, I'm triggered into the feelings. I already know that, right? But the person that's talking to me may be in their beliefs. And if I try to stay in the feelings and make in their beliefs, we will not have a productive conversation. We will miss each other. So the goal is to center yourself, right? So now all of you have the tool now, so the responsibility is on you. So when you're triggered and you're in your feelings or whatever quadrant and the other person is in an opposite quadrant, you have to go to the quadrant where they are first.
Okay.
Sit in that with them, try to figure out where they're coming from before you try to pull them to your quadrant, right? And this is if we want to really engage in a conversation, if we really want to sustain it, right? And build a relationship. Now, if you don't care to do any of that, you just check out, you know, that's one thing. But if you really want to engage and be productive, go into their quadrant first, right? And then slowly bring them to your quadrant. The goal is that you eventually check into all of them and center yourself in order for you to engage in a healthy conversation. So this is a compass. This is something that, like I said, I teach everyone who comes through my trainings, and to use this just so that they can make sense of their surroundings and so that they don't check out right away, that they engage and try to sustain a conversation about race. And so this is the compass, and this is a tool that I'm offering you to use as you start to do your work in the community. This is another one from Courageous Conversations. It's called the 4 Agreements. The 4 Agreements are basically like community norms. Basically, when you get together with this group and y'all decide to work on a particular thing, this is what you're going to agree to uphold. So while we're here and we're learning together and we're challenging systems together, we're going to agree to stay engaged. And I don't mean like not check your phone or check on your kids, right? Or take your food off the stove. That's not the kind of staying engaged I'm talking about. I'm talking about when it gets hot, when it gets hard, when someone says something that really, really triggers you, that you don't check out. You don't check out mentally, you don't check out physically. Now, I will not lie to you. Staying engaged is the hardest agreement for me to keep. One of the things I love to do is hang up on people. I mean, that is my all-time favorite thing to do. If I am in a conversation and you have triggered me, I want to hang up or slam a door. You know, and I always say like these new cell phones really have taken the power away from hanging up on people. I mean, it's just doesn't give me the same feeling, but staying engaged is the one that's hardest for me. The second agreement that we're going to keep is that we're going to speak our truth. Not your mama truth, not your cousin truth, your truth, using I statements. The third is that you're going to agree to experience discomfort, right? This is going to be an uncomfortable conversation about race. It just is, because we haven't built that muscle yet. And even when you build that muscle, you'll come to a moment where it's really uncomfortable. Like speaking to people about race has become really comfortable for me. But I went home this past weekend and I was talking to my best friend who is white, who I grew up with. And I really avoid conversations about race just because I don't want to be triggered or hurt. And we don't get to see each other that often, right? So I want to focus on all the other things. And even when we started talking about race when I went home, it was so uncomfortable. Like I was in so much discomfort because I wanted to connect with her and her husband, and we never really see each other. But I had to agree to myself. Number one was not to disengage because, you know, it was a moment when I wanted to get in my car and leave. But the second one was in that discomfort that I would stay and I would sit and I would ride the conversation out. And so that is the third agreement. The fourth one is to accept and expect non-closure. We will not solve racism today or in this year. In all the work that we're doing, we won't. But we have to accept that, right? So today, in about a few minutes, I'm going to have to close this conversation. So we're going to have to accept that it's over, right? But we can expect to pick it up again. That's what I like about this group, is that you're saying this will not be a check mark for us. This will be something that we keep coming back to. And that is the fourth agreement. You will promise each other that no matter how hard it gets, if you need a week to cool off, it doesn't matter. We're going to come back around to this subject around race.
Sean, I love that. Can I ask you a question? You said about how when you were with your friend, you made an agreement with yourself to go ahead and stay engaged and be okay with that discomfort. So you're not just talking about agreements with other people.
That's right. That's right. And so agreements, I have internalized this work so much. I think of it in so many ways. But at first it was just about keeping agreements in a room full of people or trying to solve a problem around race. Now I hold myself to these agreements, even if the other parties don't know. Okay. Right. So my sister really, I call her my sister, my best friend, she really doesn't know the 4 agreements. She has no clue about this, but I do. And so I know that in order to really build a relationship in this hard time, I'm going to have to keep these agreements with myself. Right. And one of the things I said right before I left and that we said is that we know it's really hard, but this can't be the last time we talk about it. Right. We have to pick it back up again. And so, yes, that's a great question. This is definitely agreements that you can keep with yourself and that you should. So as I mentioned, I'm a mom, just like most of you on this call. And so these are my kids. I have 2 boys and a girl. And so I just wanted to offer this to you because my work oftentimes is really rooted in my children, right? And then my grandchildren one day. And this kind of came up in my conversation with my best friend. Her husband was talking about the beauty of diversity, and he was really giving me a colorblind kind of statement that everybody is this, God loves us the same. And I understood his intentions. But what I explained to him is that, we really have to focus on impact over intentions. And what he said really impacted me in a way that was hurtful because, he has enough latitude in his white skin to focus on the beauty of diversity and how cool it is that everybody's different. But for me, that's not my focus. My focus is I'm not sure that when I allow them to go outside at night and play basketball, that they'll come in the house alive, right? So my understanding around differences is that my children are oftentimes looked at not in a positive way because they're dark, right? Because they're little Black children. And so the way I show up to this work, I cannot separate policies or just stupid people, or people always say, well, it's just racist people are stupid people. Well, okay, well, I can't separate the two, because my relationship or interaction with things like racism can be detrimental to me, and it can harm my sons and my daughter, right? And so this just means for me so much more. And that was a part of the conversation we had. They call my children niece and their nephews, and they call them aunt and uncle. And so in order to have that relationship, right, they have to become aware of what their niece and nephews go through on a day-to-day basis. And that if you are concerned about them in their life, then you have to be concerned about them in all parts of their life. And race just happens to be a factor in this country in this day and time. And so really quickly, I just wanted to kind of give clarity on these three words that I think people use interchangeably. Like they say nationality, ethnicity, and race all kind of being the same, and they're not really the same. So nationality is like your corner of the world, maybe where your citizenship is, your birth, your passport will show your nationality. Ethnicity is more of like your culture, all of the yummy good stuff that's inside of you that you love and that you want people to know most about you, right? So for me, my nationality, United States citizen, I'm from the United States of America. My ethnicity would be African American. I also have an ethnicity of being a woman, right? That's a culture. Being from the South, that's a culture. Being a Texan, that's a culture. Being a mom, that's a culture. So it's all of those things that make you up. If you've ever done a 23andMe or Ancestry.com thing, all of the things you find out in that, those go into your ethnicity. Race is different. Race is the one we didn't really get a choice in, right? Race is the one that they gave us a box to check. And unfortunately, race is who do people perceive you to be when you show up in a room? That is what race is about. So when you show up, if you were to come in the room, grab something, and somebody said, who was that person? They're going to name you by race if they don't know you, right? They're going to describe you by how you show up in the room. She was a Black woman, white woman, brown woman. They'll find every descriptor, but race is who people perceive you to be, because that's usually what kind of treatment you get based on that, right? And so I have traveled this country, I've traveled outside of this country, and I've been mistaken for a lot of things. I've been mistaken for, or just, claim to be, some people think I'm Cuban or Haitian. People have thought that I was Hispanic or Latinx, mixed, a lot of things, but I've never been mistaken for white. So what that tells me that there's a very distinct line between what is perceived to be white and what is perceived to be a person of color, right? And oftentimes that binary is what we're working in and fighting in this whole conversation about race, right? When you show up white, how are you treated? What are you allowed to do or not allowed to? I mean, the fact that you can walk around and not know race is an issue is the privilege, right? And so how do you show up in a room is your race. And so for me, I'm Black. Some people will say African American, white. I just want to share with you this. Caucasian is not a race for white people in the United States. That was a lie, right? There were fake scientists, pseudoscientists who did this fake study about people. Anyway, Caucasian people are actually people from the Caucasus Mountains, and they're brown people. But white people in the United States subscribe to that for a lot of reasons, to give them the privilege based on that science. And so you can look that up. But Caucasian is not a real race for white people in the United States. And so the classifier for me in the race category is white, for people who are white, who show up white.
Yeah, and I wanted to ask you too, I've been told, is this accurate? You're talking about race it's an okay descriptor so that I could say, yes, Sean is the black woman over there. And that would be okay for me to say, would you please take this over to my friend Sean? She's the black woman by the door.
Yeah. And so this is what I'm talking about. Because we have not been socialized to identify each other by race in public, we do it behind the scenes all day. But in public, we have learned that race is a bad thing, because oftentimes when race comes up, it is attached to a negative thing, right? And so people, I think depending on where you are in the United States, how comfortable people are by identifying people by race. But my goal is to tear down that barrier and to teach people how to identify people by their race. Because see, it's not that I don't want you to see me as a black woman. I just don't want you to put the negative meanings on me being a black woman. It's not the identifier. It's what you attach to the race is what I want you to dismantle and let go, right? And I think that's what people are trying to say and not really knowing how to say it. And so it's like, why are you calling me black? What is that about? Is it attached to something good or bad, right? And so I'm glad you said that, because one thing I want people to understand is that race is both positive and negative, right? And race is inclusive of white people and people of color. And it has been socially constructed in our lives, and it lives, right? So I know that there are certain parts of town that me being a black woman is a positive thing, right? Certain places I go, me being a black woman is good. And I also know that there are some places that I go that being a black woman can have a negative effect on my life. And so race is both positive and negative, right? So when you think about all the racial situations in your life, it doesn't mean you have to only think about the bad racial things that have happened in your life. However, negative people of color have experienced a lot of negativity solely based on the fact that they're black, right? And so there's a lot of hurt there, and there's a lot of frustration in that. And so when we talk about, just really doing our work internally to heal some of the racial wounds, that's one of the things I really believe in, because I want people of color to one day act and liberate their communities by them being liberated, right? And not being oppressed. And that comes with both us tearing down these systems and us doing our own internal work so that we can get rid of any of that anti-blackness that we have been taught to have in society. And so I just wanted to put that out there, that race is both positive and negative. And race is not the word racial, racism, or racist. That's another thing. When people say the word race, they're like, oh, don't say that, you're being racist. No, race is just a descriptor, right? And we don't get a say in it, but race does not mean racist, right? So this is another question I always ask people. How much of your life do you feel like is impacted by race? So right now, as you're looking at this, I want you to just take assessment in your brain and ask yourself, how much of my life is impacted by race? Out of 100%, how much do you think is impacted by race? And then what I will offer you is that race impacts your life 100% of the time. Your racial consciousness is the number you just subscribe to it. So race is always at play, right? The issue is, how often do you see it? And that is that racial consciousness I was talking about earlier. My goal in this work is to help people raise their racial consciousness in order to see how race is impacting their life, right? And others' lives, in order to become an anti-racist society. You cannot fix what you cannot see, right? So you cannot address, you can't say I'm fighting against racism if you don't see race. It doesn't really work that way. And I know that when people go on this journey, it's really difficult because they start to be paranoid. Like, oh my God, I'm always thinking about race. Why am I always thinking about race? And it becomes this like paranoia around it. But I would offer that in order to really do this work and fight against racism, we have to be aware at how race is playing in power dynamics in our society so that we can get rid of them. And so that's a part of our work.
So Sean, let me ask you this. What do you say to those individuals who say they don't see color, they don't see race?
Right. Well, that's what we're going to be talking about, colorblind versus color consciousness. Okay. So look at you, just on to the next one. Right, that's that colorblind mentality. That's something that was really promoted during the civil rights era for us to all kind of get along, right? Just like be colorblind, God loves us the same, we all believe the same type of thing. But during that time of promoting colorblindness is the time in which racial disparities grew exponentially, right? Because we were no longer paying attention to race explicitly. So I would say that it isn't colorblind that we're asking as a Black woman. I'm not asking you to not see color. What I'm clear about is that most of us can see color, right? We can see it. We're not fooling anyone. I'm saying I want you to shift from being colorblind to color conscious. I don't want you to subscribe negativity to my skin color. I want you to know I'm a Black woman. And oftentimes when I do these trainings, people will say, I don't see you as Black. I just see you as this, intelligent, articulate woman. And I say, and Black. See, I can be both Black, intelligent, articulate, all of those things, and be Black. So I do not want you to take that out of who I am, because being Black gives me the perspective that I have as I stand before you. We all bring our histories with us, right? That's what humans do. We bring our histories to the table. So me being a Black woman has edified my life in a lot of ways. And so what you see today is that. And so I don't want you to erase that. I want you to be conscious of that, but not subscribe old, outdated, antiquated understandings about a Black woman to who I am or to who any of my sisters are, right? And so that transition of being colorblind to color consciousness is the work of people. This can be in both people of color and white people. This colorblind aspect is not isolated and reserved for white people. Black people or people of color have learned that same social construction of not wanting to see race, right? So this is something we all have to grow into or grow out of. And so I won't share the ISD, but this is just for you thinkers out there who goes to the thinking quadrant. I always show a little data to show, and this is a real ISD, I promise you, that's very close to you, where it just shows the STAR data from students, not last year because of COVID, but the year before that. And it just kind of shows you that in third grade reading, if you look, who's at the bottom of this achievement, and then how large is the gap in that achievement. And then even when you look at economically disadvantaged, still higher than Black students. A lot of people say, Sean, it's not race, it's income. It is income is the descriptor. But I have data and could share that with y'all later, that in school districts or at the national level with the SAT, ACT, the poorest white students of families making $20,000 or below outperform the richest Black students whose families make $300,000 or above. And so this data, I would employ you to check this in every district, all of your schools. Look at your richest Black students, your most affluent Black students, or whoever's the darkest in that district, and then your wealthiest or your poorest white students. And what you'll see is that it is race that shows the disparity rather than income. So this is third grade reading, eighth grade reading. As you can see, same trends. All the way up to high school, same trends, right? And so just looking at that in all of your data, you'll see that Black students tend to be at the bottom of all of them. then people always ask, well, Sean, what are the causalities of it? Why, how is this happening? And like I said, the first thing people will say overwhelmingly, if I were to ask people, what is the causalities of students of that achievement gap? They'll say poverty, but I just talked about poverty, right? Data shows that poverty is not the single determinant. Does it impact? Absolutely, no doubt about it. But it isn't, it does not weigh as much as race in these situations. And then people will say, well, it's family involvement. And I always ask people, well, what is family involvement? And who got to determine what family involvement looked like anyway? Right? And so when I think about just my life, you know, there was a time when I was married. And so even my family was like, you know, as you get married and the husband and the wife, you know, they take care of the kids and you just call us if you need us, right? But, you know, nobody prepared me for life after divorce, right? So what happens now that I'm divorced? I tried to do it that way and now I'm divorced and I still have 3 kids. How do I make it? And I had to create a village around me. And my mom now lives by me and my sister lives they're from Florida, so they moved here. But right, the school will see my mom probably 4 days out of the week picking my kids up sometime because I work so far away or I'm traveling or whatever. And so if they put a meaning to my mom picking my kids up as opposed to me, they would say that I am not an involved parent, right? Someone who is out advocating for education, who is very serious about education in my household, I could be perceived as a parent who is not involved. And so I say that if when you close your eyes and you visualize the parent that isn't involved, what color are they? You don't have to say it out loud, right? But oftentimes, somehow race has crept into our social construct of all of these things. Oftentimes, when I ask people to close their eyes and visualize the parents that aren't involved, it's oftentimes Black parents. Or if I say, close your eyes, visualize the parents that are always involved, people oftentimes say white parents. And so how did race creep into something like that? How did we allow that? What is that blind spot? Where is that subconscious knowledge that's allowing us to visualize that thing? And then people will say, well, Sean, if it's not poverty, if it's not family involvement, it is for sure language. Language is the barrier that's causing students to not achieve at the level that they need to achieve. And then I always ask the question, whose language? Right? And when is language an asset for some and deficit for others? Right? Because when we do Spanish immersion schools and it's highly populated by white parents, we see language as bilingual. But when we see Latinx students in public education, we see their language as a deficit. They're English language learners, right? And so when is language an asset for some and a deficit for others? And I'll never forget, I was at a school district meeting and they were trying to sunset a Spanish immersion school because it didn't have a lot of enrolled students in it. And they were all, pretty much every student that was there was white, and it was inside of a all like black school. And you can tell the differences of like who was privileged in that school and who wasn't. And anyway, so they were at a board meeting sunsetting, and all these parents, they showed up to fight for this school to stay active. And a little girl, she was so cute, little white girl, she had pigtails. She got on the podium and she did her entire speech in Spanish. And when she finished, the entire board, all the board members got up and clapped. But previous to her getting up, it was a student he's going to be mayor one day. He is an active student. He brings families together, teachers together, but his first language is Spanish. He does not speak English very well. And he was giving a report to the board about what he had been doing. And everybody was kind of giving that face, you know, where they feel sorry for him because he's struggling over his words. Well, then 2 seconds later, he sees this little white girl speaking all Spanish and getting a standing ovation. All I could think is, I wonder what he's thinking. If only he knew his language would be so valued, he could have spoken so much more comfort, right? And been seen for that. But I would argue that oftentimes, if he had done that, it would have been seen as a negative rather than a positive. So when we close our eyes and we picture students of a language barrier, who do we picture? And then the last one is mobility. Just like transient students, they'll say, well, Sean, they move from apartment special to apartment special. We cannot track them down and they lose, education. And I say, well, then, if being a transit student impacts so much, I'm not saying that it does not impact. I'm saying that there are other students in this country that have been transient all their lives and are some of our highest performing students in the country. Military parents, ambassador children, they get to move not just from one side of Fort Worth to the next or one side of Dallas to the next, but country to country, state to state. So my question to educators is, well, then I don't know if it's just the fact that students are moving from one school to the next. I wonder how we receive those students who move from one school to the next. So when a student who is an ambassador's child come to your classroom mid-year, how do you receive them? As opposed to a student moving from an apartment across town walks into your class, how do you perceive them? So maybe there's something about the adult perspective of that child that might influence how well they do in school. Just a thought. Because being transient itself does not harm students' abilities to learn, right? And so I think a lot of these issues are adult issues. It's what adults frame as problems for students rather than assets for students. And so this is the thing I like to just break that mental model, break that myth about what is really causing racial disparities in education. And I would really just say, a lot of times it boils right down to how do we perceive our children? And oftentimes it is that we perceive Black children and brown children to be in poverty, to not have family involvement, to struggle in language, and to not have a stable home. And if as adults, that is our mental model, then how then do we receive those students when they come in our doors, right? And so, this is something from James Baldwin, and he said, not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced. Until we just face the ugly truth, we cannot begin to dismantle these systems, educate our children, and build a society that we all want to live in, an anti-racist society that we all want to live in. So I'm just happy that y'all are all here today trying to face the ugly truth so that we can all kind of work together to dismantle these systems and build an anti-racist society. So thank you. That's my spiel. I would love to take some questions or whatever you have for me.
So I have a question for you, Sean. And my question is, I sent you the article about our students sending the demands to our district. Yeah. And we have members of our communities have started conversations about the truth that Black Americans face and have been actively engaging to become self-aware and to lead these needed conversations throughout our community. However, we know this is only one step in the right direction. What do you suggest the community does to help the school district meet these demands of our students?
Yeah, I think there's a couple things. One, I think as adults, we have to hold elected officials accountable to really making sure that they hear our children, that this generation is valued, right? And that they have a say at the table to how they want to learn, how they want to be respected. So as a community, we as the adults have the voting power, right? And the speaking power to put covering around our children and say that we will make sure that elected officials honor your demands and bring you to the table. I think on the other side of that, as moms, what we can do is begin to, if your children are not going to schools that are public schools, that are populated by mostly Black and brown students, and they go to another school, one power we have as moms is to make sure that we create conditions so kids can collaborate together, so that kids all over our community work together to dismantle systems, even in other school districts that are not in maybe their school district is fine and maybe they feel great in their education, but they see students across at another school district, struggling and not feeling heard. Then we have to begin to connect our kids and build their fighting power, because believe it or not, our kids want to help other kids, get justice. That's just, it's in them, right? And so how do we build those bridges for our kids so they can help each other out to dismantle these systems and join forces, so that other adults can see that kids all over care about those demands rather than just these kids caring about those demands.
Okay. With the building the bridges across our communities, I know you did a racial equity summit for your Fort Worth ISD, and it was parents, community stakeholders. I told you, you are my hero, so yes, I know this. But how do we recreate that here in our backyard?
Yeah, I think it's just about getting the right people to the table. So at that summit, I was working in Fort Worth ISD, and one thing everybody kept saying was, we're tired of talking to you or one person. We want everybody in the same room at the same time, and we want to speak our truth. And what the community was really saying is that they wanted district members, elected officials, clergy, all in the same room so we can address issues. And so I said, I think I can do that. And that's how the summit was born. We built the summit out, all stakeholders come to the table, and we invited parents, teachers, students, elected officials, district members, churches, universities, and they all came together and they took these classes together. And if you wanted to present, you could. If you were a student and you wanted to present, you could. And everybody took classes together. So it wasn't like students and adults. It was everyone coming together, all races, all genders, generations, all of those things coming together to go through these learning kind of sessions together around race and racism and building a healthier community that way. And so if that's something you want to do, then begin to think about how you can, in this virtual world, we can actually do it right a little bit easier, but and just building that community to get it done. So you let me know if that's something you're interested in. I can help you out.
Oh, thank you so much. Larry, do you have a question?
I'm on this weird delay. What I wanted to say to something you said reminded me of this, and I agree with Danita. You're awesome. Thank you so much, Sean. We're doing a lot of learning here together. We're reading books, we're learning terms, we're watching videos and listening to speakers. But something that Ta-Nehisi Coates said that just got me in the gut and heart echoes what you said, that in the end, racism is a visceral experience, that it dislodges brains, blocks airways, rips muscle, extracts organs, cracks bones, breaks skulls. And you must never look away from this. You must always remember that the sociology, the history, the economics, all this intellectual stuff we're talking about, the charts, all land with great violence upon the body. And so that to me is what brought us here, was that we had this awakening of seeing the body broken in front of us, and we cannot withstand it anymore. So while there are moments that we're feeding our brain in that compass and we're enjoying talking together about it, it all comes back to keeping our Black and brown brothers alive and safe. And so we can enjoy these conversations, but to me, that is the end goal. And when we change minds and hearts within our homes and in the schools, I have to believe and hope that in the end, it's going to save lives.
Yeah. And I just want to bring, I mean, you hit it. I mean, that's really what it is. It is a personal experience of a group of people. And I just want to raise that, you know, oftentimes Black women are left out of the conversation of being brutalized in this country. And that's strategic as well, right? If we saw videos and saw as much criminal mischief or just brutality against women, I think it would crack the country open as well, right? And so us watching Black men be brutalized in the street has become such a norm that it does not, people have allowed it to go too long. And so sometimes that the narrative of Black women get left out of the conversation, and for a lot of different reasons. And so I wanted to raise that because I don't want us to miss that either, even if it's harder to stomach. Even if it's harder for us to watch women die or to know that women have been killed, we have to acknowledge that as well. And so, you know, I thank you for bringing that up. And we have to keep connected. And I'm telling you, the main way to do that is to keep close relationship with people. Be connected with humanity, because you're right. Books will get put down, you know, this intellectual space, and adults, we love to live in the thinking and acting. We have been rewarded for thinking and acting. So that's where we live, right? We're not rewarded for believing and feeling. You know, when is the last time you went to work and they were like, we're going to promote you because you did that feeling thing so good? They're not doing it. But it is the feelings that radicalize our beliefs in order to make real change for people in ourselves. So I think you're right about that. And as much as we can, continue to fight to tap into your feelings in a situation and fight yourself out of that intellectual space, because intellect sometimes will allow you to be paralyzed, right? And so how then do you become a feeler around really hard issues? So it's a great point.
Because at some point you have to walk through the entire compass.
Yeah.
To get a better understanding of what's happening.
That's right. There you go. Right. It's about checking into every quadrant, right? It's about getting unstuck and not being afraid to dance your little self over to the feelings, because staying in the thinking and acting feels real good. Right. But feelings causes us to find a lot of discomfort. And that is the one we struggle with, because if we're uncomfortable, we've been taught to seek comfort. Right. Yeah. And so that's a great point. You got to check into all the quadrants.
And I think a lot of people are uncomfortable when they get to that thinking quadrant.
Yeah.
That feeling quadrant, I mean, because that feeling quadrant starts to touch at home.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so home becomes disruptive. But for you and I, home has always been disruptive because we've always had these conversations.
Yeah. And truthfully, and particularly for white people, when you go into when they go into the feelings, there's a lot of guilt and shame there. And right. And so if you ever look up information about racial identity development, white people in their journey to anti-racism will pass this stage, like the third stage of guilt and shame. And because guilt and shame can be so debilitating, white people in particular will retreat because guilt and shame is so tough. So my thing when I'm talking to white people in particular is the one question they always ask me is, how do I get out of guilt and shame? I'm here and it sucks and it hurts. And I didn't do it personally, but I know it was done. And so it's this real guilt and shame. And what I would say is that those are the emotions you have to deal with, right? That is when you become to try to educate yourself out of guilt and shame. When you have to set the guilt and shame aside to then see the thinking part of that quadrant, right? So if your feelings are focused around guilt and shame, then know that it's a stumbling block, and it can be a barrier to you becoming very much so anti-racist. Now, will I lie to you that once you become anti-racist, will you not have a day where you tumble back down to guilt and shame? Absolutely, right? It's not a linear process. It is this moment of like going up and coming down. And so, but for white people in particular, guilt and shame is that emotion that really holds them back. For people of color, the emotion and the feeling that holds them back is anger. Yeah. Disagreement, right? So anger really makes you want to retreat, only want to be around people who look like you, who understand what you're going through. And then you cannot get to the point of being anti-racist where you can work with a multicultural group because you're so angry. And so I wouldn't lie to you and say that, I mean, I've been doing this work for a while, so I try to live in the anti-racist space. But when George Floyd was killed and all that happened, I tumbled down to anger.
Yeah.
I didn't want to be around anybody. I wanted to only be around people who understood. And I only particularly wanted to be around particularly Black people, because I felt that more comfort there, right? So that's why I wanted to retreat, because the pain, the anger was so much to bear. And so just knowing that journey, right? And the feelings that you get in that feeling quadrant, and knowing which ones are good, or should I say, which ones could be a barrier to you returning back to anti-racism. Yeah.
Right. And I think I know a problem for me is having to explain to my white friends again why I'm angry. It's like every time there's an incident, you know, an issue, a death, a murder, I'm having to explain my anger and my outrage again. And it's sort of like, okay, did you just check out of life after, you know, so it's almost like a slap in the face, because I've explained to you my outrage once. So are you not hearing me intentionally? Yeah. But you get that luxury to check out. I don't.
Yeah, and I think it also goes back to this narrative that we've been taught, that these are isolated, random incidents and not a systemic problem. So if they're isolated, the last person we saw be murdered on TV like that was Fidel Castillo, right? That was like 4 years ago. So it's like, why? Hold on. I mean, why are you this angry? And it was, you know, so oftentimes, because people in this country who have lighter skin can check out in that and see things as isolated events. That's just a bad cop. That's just that bad clerk in that store. That's just a bad teacher. They don't see, oftentimes, haven't seen that constant microaggression on a day-to-day basis, so that when a situation like George Floyd happens, that is the straw, right? That is the moment of cracking. That's that bones. That's that ripping. But all the way from the last months, you've just been getting little peels, little nicks, little plucks. And then this happens, and it is a ripping, a crushing, a way at your heart and who you are. And so it's that buildup. And so I would say two things to that. Our white sisters and brothers, just like my best friend, my sister, they've got to do their work, right? To really begin to understand what that is about. And then for my Black sisters and brothers, understanding that it is okay, number one, to have your space where you take care of you. And for those who have the capacity, can then step in that place and teach our white sisters and brothers. Not all of us have the capacity in that moment, but some of us do. And so knowing where you are in the journey, sometimes I have a lot of capacity and I can explain it 45 times. That's my job. And then there's other times where I don't have a lot of capacity. I need somebody else to pick it up for me. So I would say people of color, knowing how much capacity we have and just being straight up and honest and say, I don't have the capacity to teach this time.
Thank you, Sean and Danita, for having the capacity to teach us, and especially Danita for staying in this and engaging in this conversation and group with me for the long haul. But yes, she knows she can take a break if ever she needs. But wow, we appreciate y'all's expertise and gift in this.
Well, thank you.
I just want to thank Sean for doing this. I want to thank Larry again. It's probably the 1,000th time that I've said that. I want to applaud you, because I'm telling you, as a white woman, to start this group, you stepped out of your comfort zone and you stepped into a hornet's nest, because there are going to be those that are going to go against you. There are going to be those that, what is she doing? Because it's out of the norm. Mm-hmm. So I just want to, again, applaud you for that. And I appreciate you, because it's your community that needs it. You know, it's our community that needs it. And we have to realize that we're all in this together, just on different levels. We're on different levels. And again, Sean, you always wow me. I think I talked to Larry about you for like a week or so straight. And I was like, we got to get her on here. It's just no way not having it, because you are always so impactful and you're always so passionate about the work. And I just want to thank you. And yes, we will be having a summit.
Yes, yes. Well, thank you. And I applaud your group, and I applaud the courage of both of you, and just really tackling an issue that needs to be tackled, and deciding, no matter the risk, that you're gonna keep coming back to it. So I really commend that, and I love that the both of you are being braver in this moment. So awesome.
Thank you for helping us be brave, Sean. We're all becoming better humans, learning how to treat other humans better.
Right? Exactly. In our braver space.
That's right.
Have a good night.
Thank
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, for watching. Keep commenting and posting. You're awesome.
Yes, and they can send me any comments or questions through my Twitter. So
Okay,
Okay.
handle.
all right.
Okay.
Got you.
Thank you.